Chapter 3. The Volkov Hotel stood like a glittering fortress against the Atlanta skyline, its Art Deco facade illuminated by strategically placed lights that made the white stone glow like alabaster. Isabella Santos tugged at the unfamiliar neckline of her midnight blue gown, feeling as out of place as a boxer attending a ballet. The silky fabric whispered against her skin with every movement, a constant reminder that she was far outside her comfort zone of tailored suits and sensible mid-heel shoes. "Stop fidgeting," Damon whispered, adjusting his bow tie with practiced fingers. At 28, her assistant looked surprisingly at home in his rented tuxedo, as though he'd been attending society galas his entire life instead of organizing case files and fetching her coffee. "You look amazing, by the way. I barely recognized you without the power suit and permanent scowl." "I don't scowl," Isabella said automatically, consciously smoothing her features. She caught a glimpse of herself in the mirrored surface of a nearby pillar and realized she had, in fact, been scowling. The reflection showed a woman she barely recognized, hair swept up in an elegant chignon instead of her usual practical ponytail, subtle makeup enhancing eyes that usually hid behind reading glasses after hours of scrutinizing evidence. And this dress was a mistake. I can barely breathe, let alone move quickly if needed. That's the point. Rich people like to suffer for fashion. He grinned, straightening her diaphanous wrap with the casual confidence of someone who watched too many red carpet events. His usually nervous energy had transformed into a surprising social ease that Isabella envied. "Just be glad I talked you out of wearing those sensible pumps. Those silver stilettos are much more convincing." Isabella wobbled slightly as they approached the entrance. She caught herself on Damon's arm, her fingers digging into his sleeve as she fought for balance. Bentleys, Maseratis, and even a Rolls-Royce glided up to the portico, disgorging Atlanta's elite in waves of designer fabrics and blinding jewelry. The air was thick with expensive perfume, the scent of wealth, subtle notes of jasmine and sandalwood mingling with the earthy smell of rain threatening in the distance. The rumble of powerful engines provided a bass line to the symphony of cultivated laughter and the gentle clinking of jewelry as the wealthy moved with the confident ease of those who belonged. "Convincing for what? I'm here to observe a suspect, not to impress anyone." She clutched her small silver handbag, reassured by the weight of her badge and phone inside. The hard edges of the metal badge pressed against her palm through the thin fabric, a tangible reminder of her real identity beneath this glamorous disguise. "A suspect who happens to be one of Atlanta's most eligible bachelors and a philanthropist," Damon countered, nodding appreciatively at a flower arrangement that probably cost more than his monthly rent. His eyes widened at each new display of opulence, betraying his discomfort despite his outward confidence. The society pages would murder someone to get a photo of him with an actual date. Isabella snorted. "He's probably gay. Plus, he's a suspect who matches our witness's description of a murderer." She used her grasp on Damon's arm to steer him away from a passing couple who'd glanced their way with the evaluating eye of social climbers identifying interlopers. She felt her instincts kick in, analyzing, assessing, cataloguing potential threats. "Focus, Damon. We're here to work, not to socialize. This isn't a night off." He nodded, his expression more serious as her words cut through his initial wonder at their surroundings. "Sorry, game face on. I was just... He straightened his shoulders, his voice dropping to a professional murmur. This is just all so... much. The grand ballroom of the Volkov Hotel was a study in opulence. Crystal chandeliers hanging from 30-foot ceilings. Champagne towers catching the light at strategic intervals. And wall sconces casting a golden glow over Atlanta's elite. Light danced across the room in a kaleidoscope of refracted brilliance, throwing rainbow prisms across white tablecloths and creating halos around the guests. The air smelled of expensive perfume, fresh flowers, and money. Lots of it. The kind of wealth that didn't need to announce itself because every detail from the hand-painted ceiling murals to the imported marble floor did the talking. The marble beneath Isabella's stilettos was polished to such a high sheen that it reflected the women's jewel-toned gowns like a mirror, creating the illusion that they were walking on water. Isabella fought the urge to cross her arms defensively, as she always did when uncomfortable, knowing it would ruin the line of her dress. Instead, she squared her shoulders and lifted her chin slightly, the same posture she used when facing hostile witnesses in court. A string quartet played something classical and appropriately bland in the corner, while waiters maneuvered through the crowd with trays of hors d'oeuvres that looked too artistic to eat. The delicate notes of violins floated above the murmur of conversation, occasionally punctuated by the musical tinkle of genuine laughter or the sharper crack of forced amusement. One server passed with what appeared to be tiny gardens on crackers, complete with what Isabella hoped was edible soil. The scent of truffle oil and seared scallops wafted from another tray, reminding her stomach that she'd skipped dinner to prepare for this infiltration. Damon gave a low whistle, quickly covered by a cough, when Isabella shot him a warning glance. So, this is how the other half lives. The other 0.5%, Isabella corrected him, accepting a flute of champagne from a passing waiter with a polite nod. She wouldn't drink it, but it provided cover and occupation for her hands, which felt awkwardly empty without a case file or pen. The crystal was so fine, it felt almost weightless, the champagne within it sending up a constellation of tiny bubbles that tickled her nose with notes of apple and brioche. According to the guest list, at least 3 state Supreme Court justices and half the city council are here. This gala isn't just a social gathering, it's a power summit disguised as a charity fundraiser. Her eyes scanned the room methodically, cataloguing faces and positions with the practiced ease of someone who made her living, observing details others missed. The mayor stood near one of the ice sculptures, deep in conversation with a woman Isabella recognized as the head of Atlanta's largest hospital. His perfectly coiffed silver hair and camera-ready smile betrayed a lifetime in politics. All surface, no substance. The ice sculpture beside him, a swan with wings outstretched, dripped slowly the water, creating a small puddle that a vigilant server was continuously mopping. A circuit court judge, whose corruption case Isabella had been forced to drop last year due to a technicality, laughed too loudly at something a tech CEO said. His face was flushed with alcohol, or the thrill of getting away with something. Isabella's jaw tightened involuntarily. The connections and collaborations in this room would shape Atlanta's future, for better or worse. The $5,000 per plate fundraiser for children's cancer research had drawn Atlanta's wealthiest and most influential citizens. Thankfully, Elaine, in Chief Prosecutor Rogers' office, had been able to score them 2 courtesy tickets. there was no sign yet of their host. Isabella noticed that despite the apparent relaxation of champagne-loosened conversation, people's eyes frequently darted toward the main entrance, anticipating an arrival. The atmosphere held a barely perceptible tension, like an orchestra awaiting the conductor's entrance. Even the waitstaff moved with extra attention, their backs straightening whenever the massive double doors at the entrance opened to admit new guests. "There," Damon murmured, nodding toward the far end of the room where a subtle shift in the crowd's energy was taking place. Conversations paused, heads turned, and a pathway almost magically cleared through the throng. The ambient noise level dropped noticeably, like a theatre audience quieting as the curtain rises. Damon's usually fidgety hands went still on his champagne glass. "That has to be him." Isabella followed his gaze, and her breath caught in her throat. Mikhail Volkov moved through the crowd like a shark through water, smooth, deliberate, commanding attention without seeming to seek it. Tall and lean, with broad shoulders accentuated by impeccable tailoring, he had the kind of presence that made people instinctively step aside. His tuxedo was classic black, but something about the cut and fabric marked it as astronomically expensive. Not flashy, but so perfectly fitted. It seemed an extension of his body rather than a garment. His dark hair, just long enough to hint at rebellion against convention, was styled in a way that looked effortless, but was undoubtedly the work of a stylist whose services required a waiting list. Not just his clothing or conventional good looks set him apart. There was something in the way he moved, a fluid grace that seemed too precise, too aware. While others gestured broadly during their conversations, champagne sloshing dangerously close to glass rims. His movements were economical and controlled. He didn't waste energy. "That's him?" Isabella whispered, though she already knew without a doubt. Based on Mia's description, the sketch artist's rendering hadn't captured the full effect. The high cheekbones, the strong jaw, and eyes that seemed to miss nothing even from a distance. She felt a strange flutter in her stomach that she immediately attributed to investigative excitement, not how his presence appeared to magnetize the entire room. "The one and only." Damon took a sip of his champagne, not bothering to hide his curiosity as he stared over the rim of his glass. Her assistant utterly forgot his usual professional reserve in the face of such compelling subject matter. Mikhail Volkov came to Atlanta 15 years ago, bought up half of Midtown when it was still affordable, and turned it into a gold mine. No one knows where he came from before that. Some say old Russian money. Others say the tech industry overseas. He doesn't do interviews. Isabella nodded, confirming the same thing she'd researched while studying Volkov's interactions with various guests. Her fingers itched for her notebook, but she settled for mental notes, her eyes narrowing as she observed his careful navigation of the social terrain. "He's younger than I expected." 38 according to the society pages. Volkov looks like he could be anywhere from 30 to 45, depending on the light. One of those ageless types. Damon gestured with his champagne flute, liquid dangerously close to spilling. He speaks at least 6 languages and remembers everyone he meets. The gossip blogs are obsessed with him, but he's essentially a ghost online. No social media, almost no photos unless they're official. Isabella moved carefully along the room's perimeter, finding a position that allowed her to observe without being obvious. Damon followed in her wake. The carpet here was thicker, muffling her footsteps and providing blessed relief to her aching feet. She'd perfected this technique in her years as a prosecutor. The art of watching without being watched, of gathering information while appearing merely decorative. She watched as Volkov greeted guests. A handshake here, a kiss on the cheek there, a quiet word that made a stern-faced judge burst into surprised laughter. Despite his cordial interactions, she noticed he maintained a subtle distance from everyone, a bubble of personal space that no one seemed inclined to breach. Even when physically close to others, he appeared isolated, contained, some other creature from them entirely. "He knows everyone," she observed, noting how the initial cluster around him had dispersed as he moved methodically through the room. She mentally catalogued each interaction, searching for patterns, for incongruities. And not superficially. Look at how he's speaking to the mayor. That's not small talk. He's reminding him of something, and Collier doesn't look happy about it. The mayor, a silver-haired man with a politician's smile permanently affixed to his face, had lost his practiced expression during whatever Volkov was murmuring. His face had gone slightly pale, his posture stiffening before he forced a laugh and clapped Volkov on the shoulder with what looked like forced camaraderie. Isabella recognized the body language of a man caught in a lie. The mayor's cufflinks caught the light as he gestured emphatically, gold winking as though sending distress signals. Damon nodded, following her gaze with the keen observation skills she'd worked to cultivate in him. He's reputed to have an encyclopedic memory, the kind of guy who knows where all the bodies are buried. Metaphorically speaking, I hope. He shifted his weight nervously, his earlier confidence wavering as the reality of their investigation set in. A bead of sweat formed at his temple, despite the ballroom's perfect temperature control. What's his connection to the victims? Isabella kept her voice low, though no one was paying them attention in the crowded room. The music had shifted to something slightly more modern, and a few couples had moved to the dance floor at the center of the room. She tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. The hairpin securing her chignon dug uncomfortably into her scalp, a small pain she welcomed as a focus point. Nothing on paper. The victims didn't work for him, weren't tenants in his buildings, and had no financial connections we could trace. Damon took another canapé from a passing tray, this one topped with something that looked suspiciously like caviar. His culinary adventurousness was a stark contrast to Isabella's careful restraint. He popped it into his mouth and continued speaking around the bite, his expression shifting to surprised pleasure at the taste. The first victim was at an event he attended the month before her death. The second was a barista at a coffee shop he's known to frequent. Blackbird on 10th. The most recent one worked at an art gallery from which his foundation purchased pieces. Isabella frowned, mentally reviewing the case files she'd practically memorized. Her fingers tensed around her champagne flute. That's not much. You're right. Damon dabbed at his lips with a cocktail napkin. But matching a witness sketch isn't nothing, especially when the witness was so specific. And the connections are weird. All three victims somehow crossed paths with him. Correlation isn't causation, Isabella reminded him, though the coincidence had caught her attention too. She tapped her manicured nail against the champagne flute, a substitute for her usual pen clicking when deep in thought. The gentle ping of nail against crystal was nearly lost in the ambient noise of the gala, but to her, It was as familiar and comforting as a heartbeat. True, but how many of them look like our sketch? Those cheekbones aren't exactly common. Damon's eyes continued to track Volkov across the room, his natural curiosity overriding his attempt at professional detachment. And don't forget what Mia said about the way he moved. Too fast, too not human. Isabella quieted him with a slight shake of her head as a couple drifted too close to their position. The woman wore a perfume so overwhelming that Isabella could taste it at the back of her throat, cloying sweetness with chemical undertones that made her want to step back. She pretended to sip her champagne, using the glass to cover her mouth as she whispered, "Not here." Damon nodded, understanding immediately. He shifted topics, commenting loudly on the ice sculpture as the couple passed. The lights reflecting through the crystal-clear ice cast prismatic rainbows across his face as he gestured enthusiastically. Once they were out of earshot, he continued more quietly. "I still say we should have brought the witness for a confirmation." And risk re-traumatizing a homeless teenager who's already terrified? Isabella's voice took on a protective edge. "Not to mention tipping our hand. No, we need more before we take official action." She continued her surveillance, noting how Volkov cut through the crowd. There was something almost predatory about his awareness, the way he seemed to track movements without looking directly at them. When a waiter stumbled nearby, his head turned a split second before the sound of breaking glass, the crystalline shatter echoing through the ballroom for an instant before being absorbed by the plush carpets and tapestries. His reflexes were just a hair too quick, his focus too sharp. She'd seen similar hyper-awareness in combat veterans and undercover cops. People trained to notice threats before they manifested. But this was different. More primal, more instinctive. "He doesn't belong here," she murmured, the observation forming before she could fully articulate why. Her gut instinct, the same one that had helped her solve cases others had abandoned, was humming with warning. "In what way?" "The man owns the hotel," Damon replied, casting a bewildered glance her way. "He's the host." "Not like that. I mean, among the guests. Among these people." She struggled to put her finger on what felt off, her brow furrowing as she tried translating intuition into concrete observation. "Watch how he observes everyone. It's like he's studying a different species." Damon gave her a sidelong glance, his expression shifting to the one he wore when she made conceptual leaps he couldn't follow. "You're getting that weird look again." Isabella chewed her lower lip thoughtfully. The waxy taste of expensive lipstick coated her tongue, reminding her how far she was from her comfort zone. "It's nothing concrete, just..." Isabella trailed off, watching Volkov decline a glass of champagne with a polite gesture. His hand moved through the air with unsettling grace, like a conductor directing an invisible orchestra. "He's not drinking, not eating either. He's just watching, performing being one of them, but not participating. Maybe he's just careful about what he consumes in public, or he doesn't drink alcohol. A lot of people don't." Damon shrugged, though his eyes narrowed as he began hunting for details he'd missed. Maybe. She wasn't convinced. Something about Mikhail Volkov set off her internal alarms, not just because of the case connection, but something more primal, a sense that beneath the civilized veneer was something other. Her fingers tightened around the stem of her champagne flute, knuckles whitening slightly. Isabella was about to elaborate when she felt it. a prickling sensation at the base of her neck, the feeling of being observed with an intensity that made the fine hairs on her arms stand up. It was as physical as a touch, raising goosebumps beneath the delicate fabric of her dress. She turned slowly, scanning the crowd, but couldn't identify the source. The feeling persisted, like phantom fingers trailing along her spine. It wasn't the general awareness of being in public view, but something specifically focused, penetrating, as if someone had pierced the protective bubble she maintained in crowds. "I want to get closer," she decided, handing her untouched champagne to Damon. Her voice took on the determined cadence it carried when she was building a case, piece by methodical piece. Find a way to observe his interactions up close. "You want me to create a distraction? I could spill something on him," Damon offered, only half joking as he took her glass. His eyes lit up with the mischievous quality that made him both an excellent assistant and occasionally a liability. "I bet that tux costs more than my student loans." She shook her head, unable to suppress a small smile at his enthusiasm. "Number, I need you to circulate and see what people are saying about him. Listen for anything unusual, any gossip about odd habits or behaviors. Someone in this room knows something more than what's in the society pages." Damon nodded and melted into the crowd with surprising ease for someone who usually spent his days surrounded by legal briefs. His social adaptability was one of his greatest assets. People talked to Damon and trusted him like they never did with Isabella and her more intimidating presence. Isabella moved in the opposite direction, keeping Volkov in her peripheral vision, while appearing to admire the architectural details of the ballroom. She'd learned early in her career that direct observation often altered behavior. People performed when they knew they were watched. It was better to approach obliquely to catch authentic moments. She was studying an ornate cornice, tracing the intricate plasterwork with her eyes while trying to maintain awareness of Volkov's position across the room. When the prickling sensation returned, stronger this time, almost electric, the fine hairs on her arms stood up, and a shiver ran down her spine that had nothing to do with the temperature-controlled perfection of the ballroom. She knew before turning that he was behind her. "The moldings are original," a voice said, low and melodic, with the barest trace of an accent she couldn't quite place. Something Eastern European, but polished by years abroad. The voice carried a rich timbre that seemed to vibrate between them, too intimate for a public space. It resonated in her chest like the lowest notes from the cello in the quartet, physically felt as much as heard. From 1926, when this was still the Grand Marquis Hotel, I had them restored rather than replaced. Isabella turned slowly, schooling her features into polite interest rather than the shock she felt at his silent approach. How had he moved across the crowded ballroom without her noticing? She'd been tracking him specifically, yet he'd appeared behind her without warning. His presence announced only by a subtle scent of forest and something wilder, a scent that seemed out of place in the artificial perfection of the ballroom, yet suited him perfectly. Mikhail Volkov stood less than an arm's length away, his presence even more commanding up close. His eyes were blue-grey, not the glowing red Mia had described, but unnervingly intense, seeming to absorb every detail of her appearance in a single glance. "They're beautiful," she managed, impressed by how steady her voice sounded despite her racing heart. She deliberately maintained eye contact, refusing to be intimidated by his height or presence. You've preserved the history while updating the functionality. It's rare to see that level of respect for original architecture. Something flickered in his expression, perhaps surprise at her substantive response rather than the social pleasantries he must be accustomed to. His lips curved slightly at the corners, not quite a smile, but an acknowledgement of unexpected depth. Most people don't notice, he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed designed not to carry beyond their immediate space. Despite his neutral expression, there was warmth in his tone. The chandeliers above cast his face in alternating light and shadow as he tilted his head slightly, studying her with unconcealed interest. "They're too distracted by the chandeliers," he said. "The chandeliers are meant to be distracting," Isabella replied, finding her footing in the unexpected conversation. Her analytical mind always functioned best when challenged. "The mouldings tell the real story." A smile touched the corners of his mouth, not quite reaching his eyes. His gaze remained watchful, calculating behind the social veneer. "And what story do you think they tell, Miss Santos?" The use of her name sent a cold shock down her spine, as tangible as if someone had pressed an ice cube against her vertebrae. She hadn't given her real name on the guest list, having attended as Damon's +1. Her mind raced through possibilities. Had she been recognized? Was her investigation compromised? Her years in the courtroom had taught her to control her reactions, but she felt her pulse jump visibly at the base of her throat. His smile widened slightly at her reaction, revealing perfect teeth. Too perfect, she thought absurdly, like a predator's display rather than a social gesture. "If you're investigating me, Miss Santos, perhaps you should ask your questions directly."